So, what if a period of history, one that maybe feels a bit obscure, actually holds the key to unlocking some of the trickiest passages in the New Testament? That's the fascinating question we're diving into today. We're exploring the Second Jewish Commonwealth.
Yeah, this deep dive, it covers a really pivotal time, from 516 BCE all the way to 136 CE. It's an era that, as we found in our source material, really serves as the essential backdrop, historical, cultural, linguistic, religious, political, for understanding people like Jesus, the apostles, and, well, the New Testament itself.
So our mission here really is to pull out the key insights from the material and show how, getting a handle on this era can actually clear up some of those biblical texts that, let's face it, often feel pretty cryptic. And as we go through this history, you should probably brace yourself for a pretty groundbreaking insight that comes out of the material. It's presented as a revolutionary discovery that kind of reframes how we understand one of the Bible's most debated prophecies.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fresh look at Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy. And according to the framework we're digging into, it claims to resolve centuries of chronological confusion. It offers a perspective on this prophecy that really does challenge a lot of the established views.
Okay, let's unpack this then. One of the core arguments in the material is that this Second Jewish Commonwealth, it wasn't just, random history happening. Instead, it's presented as a series of carefully orchestrated stages of divine redemptive history, basically preparing the world for the Messiah. Like history itself was setting the stage for this huge arrival.
That's exactly the perspective.
Yeah.
The narrative kicks off with the Persian dawn. We see Cyrus the Great's edict, 539 BCE, letting the Jewish exiles return, rebuild the temple, fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy.
Yeah.
And the source material presents this not just as politics, but as divine orchestration.
Right. And then there's Ezra's crucial decree in 458 BCE from Artaxerxes. This wasn't just about rebuilding the temple walls, was it?
Not at all. The material really stresses its significance as the full restoration of Jerusalem's judicial autonomy. It effectively made Mosaic law part of Persian law.
Okay. And that's where Daniel's prophecy comes in, according to this view.
This is where it gets really precise. Our source material argues that this 458 BCE decree, specifically not a later one, is the actual starting point for Daniel's prophetic timeline. It's framed as the divine trigger, launching what it calls the most precise prophetic timeline in human history.
Wow. Okay. But the Persian court wasn't all decrees and rebuilding plans, right? There was some pretty intense drama happening elsewhere. The story of Esther over in Susa during Xerxes' reign.
Oh, absolutely. You've got Queen Vashti being deposed, Esther's kind of unexpected rise, Haman's terrible plot involving the casting of Purim or lots.
And Mordecai's crucial role in uncovering it all.
Right. It's a powerful story of divine reversal,
Yeah.
justice. Haman ends up on his own gallows. And the source emphasizes how this narrative shows divine providence working even through, well, seemingly secular politics. That's a key theme for the whole Commonwealth period.
That even when it looks like just human maneuvering, there might be a bigger purpose at play.
Exactly.
Okay, moving forward a bit in time, a new power storms onto the world stage. Alexander the Great.
Philip II's son, tutored by Aristotle, famously. He had this grand vision, didn't he? Spreading Greek civilization, Hellenism.
And the material we looked at connects his rise directly to biblical prophecy.
Yes, his conquests are seen as fulfilling parts of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the Bronze Kingdom, that leopard with 4 wings and heads, the he-goat vision. From this prophetic viewpoint, his rapid expansion wasn't just ambition, it was preparing the world.
And a key moment in that was the Battle of Granicus, 334 BCE.
Definitely significant militarily, yes, but maybe even more so culturally.
Yeah.
It really kicked off the Hellenization of the ancient world.
And why is that so important in this context?
Because it led to the spread of Koine Greek. This wasn't just another language. It became the common tongue, the lingua franca of the whole region, which of course paved the way for the New Testament to be written and for its message to spread incredibly quickly.
So the argument is Alexander's empire essentially built the infrastructure needed for the gospel.
The cultural and linguistic infrastructure, exactly. That's how the source puts it, for the rapid spread of the message.
Okay, now let's get into what this material calls the revolutionary discovery. This fresh take on Daniel's 70th week, this is where, as you said, it really bumps up against the scholarly consensus.
It does. At its heart, this framework proposes a really precise calculation. It argues that starting from Ezra's 458 BCE decree, you count exactly 483 Jewish years, that's the 69 weeks of years, and it lands you right at 26 CE. And that date, 26 CE, is pinpointed as the start of John the Baptist's ministry.
Okay, so 26 CE, John the Baptist and Jesus too start their ministries then.
According to this interpretation, yes. John's declarations, "Behold the Lamb of God," those are seen as the official herald's presentation of the Messiah, just as Daniel predicted.
And that directly contradicts the more common dating, which is usually around 2930 CE for Jesus' baptism.
It does. And the reason given is pretty compelling, actually. This framework suggests that the traditional dating creates an impossible margin of error for a prophecy that's claimed to be supernaturally precise. Divine prophecy, the argument goes, has to be exact. So, in this view, Jesus had a 7-year ministry, 26 CE to 33 CE, fitting neatly with the widely accepted 33 CE crucifixion date.
A 7-year ministry, that's also quite different from the typical 3 or 3.5 years you often hear about.
It is, and it's intrinsically linked to how this framework understands the structure of that final, crucial 70th week.
How does the Bible itself shape our understanding of that week's structure? Are there constraints?
Well, the material points to a consistent pattern you see across Daniel, Matthew, Mark, even Revelation. It argues the 70th week, the tribulation period, always unfolds in 3.5-year segments, 42 months, never as a full, unbroken 7 years. And the theological reason given. It demonstrates God's mercy operating even within judgment, his intention to shorten those days.
Okay, so let's lay out this specific timeline for the 70th week, the one being proposed here. It sounds quite detailed.
It is very specific. Let's break it down. 1, the 69 weeks end in 25 CE.
Okay.
2, the Messiah is presented John's baptism, early 26 CE. Again, contrary to the consensus.
Right.
3, then there's a significant gap, a grace period, from 26 CE all the way to 66 CE. Over 40 years of what's called covenant mercy.
40 years. Wow.
4, the Messiah is cut off Jesus' crucifixion in 33 CE. That date generally aligns with consensus.
Okay, familiar ground there.
5, the 70th week itself begins on January 31st, 67 CE. This is identified as the start of the Zealot abomination in the temple.
So the final week starts decades after the crucifixion.
In this framework, yes. 6, the first half of that week ends exactly 1,260 days later, on July 14th, 70 CE, with the cessation of the daily sacrifice during the Roman siege.
Precisely 1,260 days. 3.5 years.
Exactly. 7, then there's what's called a mandatory gap. Because Jesus promised to shorten those days, the remaining 32 months cannot run consecutively.
So the second half is postponed.
8, the second half, the final 42 months, is placed much later, from 132 to 136 CE, during the Bar Kokhba revolt. That's called the Little Season, which completes the 70th week.
That is an incredibly specific and frankly unusual timeline. Why is that gap inside the 70th week so essential to this view?
The core argument hinges on Jesus' words. His explicit promise to shorten Greek word is kolabu, meaning to cut short or amputate those tribulation days. It makes it, in this view, impossible for the 70th week to run as 7 consecutive years. The first 1,260 days ended in 70 CE, and the remaining days were held back, postponed by divine mercy until Bar Kokhba. It's seen as Jesus fulfilling his word literally.
It's certainly a comprehensive system. Okay, let's shift back a bit historically. The Second Commonwealth period wasn't exactly peaceful leading up to these events. We need to talk about the Maccabean Revolution.
Right. That whole situation ignited in Modin. An elderly priest, Mattathias Hasmon, refuses Antiochus V's order to make a pagan sacrifice, a very courageous act. That refusal sparks a guerrilla war led by him and his 5 sons, including the famous Judah Maccabeus.
And that leads eventually to the story of Hanukkah, right? The temple recapture, the rededication in 164 BCE, the miracle of the oil lasting 8 days.
Exactly. The source material points to Hanukkah as symbolizing that Maccabean achievement, doing the impossible through, well, divine blessing.
Their success actually led to Jewish political independence for a time, didn't it? The Hasmonean dynasty.
It did, starting around 141 BCE. And here's a critical insight from the source. It argues the Hasmonean state, not Rome, was actually Daniel's 4th kingdom.
Really? Not Rome?
Not initially. It sees the Hasmoneans evolving from pure iron strength in their early days down to the iron-clay weakness that characterized the later Herodian rule, which was intertwined with Rome.
But that independence didn't last. What went wrong?
The material points to a fatal flaw. The Hasmoneans combined the roles of king and high priest, mixing crown and altar. This violated biblical principles, led to internal conflict, and eventually it created the weakness that allowed Roman intervention in 67 BCE. That was pretty much the end of real independence.
Which sets the stage for the Herodian dynasty. Herod the Great, A complex figure.
Very complex, often described as iron mixed with clay. He ruled from 37 to 4 BCE. An incredible builder, Caesarea Maritima, Masada, that massive temple reconstruction project.
But also incredibly paranoid and ruthless, executing family members, the massacre of the infants in Bethlehem.
Exactly. And it was during his reign, around 6 BCE, according to many scholars, that Jesus was born. Herod's horrific actions actually ended up fulfilling prophecy.
And after Herod.
His successors, like Archelaus, Antipas, Philip, they just didn't have his capability or ruthlessness. Things became more unstable. Judea came under direct Roman rule in 6 CE, and tensions just kept rising, setting the stage for those dramatic final decades.
Okay, so that brings us right up to what the source calls the climactic fulfillment, Daniel's 70th week actually playing out.
And it starts, in a sense, with the ministry of judgment. John the Baptist's message wasn't just be nice. It was about repentance and coming judgment. It cut right to the core of the spiritual state of the Commonwealth, basically saying the temple system wasn't enough anymore.
And Jesus.
Jesus intensified that message. He consistently focused on the end of this generation and this age. His audience would have understood that meant their current world system centered on Jerusalem and the temple.
His Olivet discourse, for example, seems very focused on that.
Absolutely. Systematic predictions of Jerusalem's destruction, the temple's destruction, not one stone left on another. It's very specific.
And the cleansing of the temple. More than just anger.
According to this view, yes. It was a profound prophetic act. It symbolized the coming judgment that would permanently end the sacrificial system, with Jesus himself replacing it.
Okay. This leads into what the source calls axiomatic specifics, using the Second Commonwealth context as the key to unlock specific New Testament passages.
Right, the hermeneutical key, as it's termed. Applying this specific historical backdrop to verses that have often been, well, debated or maybe even applied elsewhere.
Let's try one. Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy itself, Daniel 9.2427, Messiah cut off, sanctuary destroyed. How does this specific framework interpret that?
And it sees that 490-year timeline pointing directly to the climax of the Second Commonwealth. Messiah cut off is Jesus' crucifixion around 33 CE. The destruction of the city and sanctuary is Rome's destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. In that 1 week, the 70th week, is seen as split. Covenant establishment during Jesus' ministry, which dates 2633 CE, and covenant judgment during the Zealot takeover and Roman destruction, which dates 67 to 70 CE.
Okay. What about the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24.15? That's a really famous, puzzling phrase.
This framework argues its ultimate fulfillment was the Zealot occupation of the temple from 66 to 70 CE, and it leans heavily on the historian Josephus here.
The first-century Jewish historian.
Exactly. Josephus documented the Jewish war in detail. He records horrific sacrileges by the Zealots in the temple, thousands slaughtered in the courts, holy places defiled, illegitimate high priests using sacred vessels for common use. The source claims this period of desecration lasted exactly 42 months, from January 31st, 67 CE to July 14th, 70 CE, precisely 1,260 days. And early Christians, seeing this happen, recognized it as the sign Jesus gave and fled Jerusalem, mostly to Pella.
Wow, connecting it that directly to Josephus' account, that's specific. What about Paul's warnings in 2 Thessalonians 2, the strong delusion, the deceptive coming?
Here, the framework suggests Paul is describing two parousias, two comings or arrivals. Christ's true one, which involves judgment, and a false parousia orchestrated by the lawless one, identified here with the zealot false prophets and their lying wonders used to deceive people during the revolt.
Okay, so that ties into Daniel 9.26, the end shall come with a flood. Not a literal flood?
Not water, no. A demographic flood. Think about the pilgrimages to Jerusalem, huge crowds. The source argues that during the 67-70 CE revolt, false prophets used fake signs to lure pilgrims into the city, while the zealot leadership prevented people from leaving. This created a human flood trapped inside, leading to starvation and disaster. It explains perhaps why someone like Demas, Paul's companion, might have tragically been lured back. Paul's warnings become very practical life and death advice for that specific time.
That makes sense contextually. And Jesus' statement about the Great Tribulation, Matthew 24.21, such as has not been, nor ever shall be, how does that fit historically?
Again, Josephus provides the validation. He records over 1.1 million deaths just during the siege of Jerusalem. Horrific suffering, cannibalism, unprecedented. The phrase, nor ever shall be, makes sense in this view because it was the final judgment on that specific Old Covenant system. And crucially, the source emphasizes Jesus' promise to shorten those days. The documented 42 months of zealot desecration ending in 70 CE is seen as Jesus keeping that promise precisely.
So the Great Tribulation becomes a very specific, identifiable historical event for those first-century believers, not necessarily a future global event.
That's the core argument, yes.
Okay, let's look at the final violent end. The source outlines 3 catastrophic wars that mark the death throes.
Right. First, the big one, the Great War, 67-70 CE, triggered by the Roman governor Josephus Florus raiding the temple treasury. Initially, the Jewish forces had a stunning victory at Beth Horon Pass.
Like the Maccabees again.
Exactly. Which probably gave them false hope.
Yeah.
But the real catastrophe, according to this analysis, wasn't the Romans initially. It was the internal Jewish conflict, 42 months, Jan 67 to July 70, where Jewish revolutionaries desecrated their own temple. The Roman siege, which only lasted about 5 months in 70 CE, is seen as merely completing the destruction of something the Jews themselves, in this view, had already made abominable.
And the destruction itself.
On the 9th of Av, 70 CE, a day already associated with tragedy in Jewish history, the Romans breached the walls. They dismantled the temple stone by stone, just as Jesus predicted. The sacred fire went out. The sacrificial system ended. Permanently.
But it wasn't quite over yet. There was the Kitos War.
Yes, 115-117 CE, a huge, often overlooked Jewish uprising across the Roman Empire, Cyrenaica, Egypt, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, massive death tolls on both sides, hundreds of thousands, according to ancient sources.
And then the final attempt, Bar Kokhba's revolt, 132-135 CE.
The final apocalypse, as the source calls it, led by Simon Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, a last, desperate messianic uprising. For about 3 years, he actually carved out an independent Jewish state and even briefly restored some form of sacrificial worship.
But the source says this revolt was essentially doomed from the start. Why?
2 main reasons given. First, timing. Bar Kokhba rose up 62 years after the temple's destruction in 70 CE. The source argues Daniel's prophecy and the covenant period it concerned was already fulfilled and concluded. Second, theology. Any attempt to restore the temple and sacrifices after 70 CE, after Christ's work was completed according to Christian belief, was seen as building an essentially pagan sanctuary. God, in this view, had already replaced that system. Bar Kokhba's failure wasn't just military, it was a theological necessity.
So bringing it all together, these 3 wars, 67-70, 115-117, and 132-135, represent, in this framework, the complete fulfillment of Daniel's 70th week, including both 42-month segments.
That's the comprehensive claim, yes, which naturally leads to a critique of why other interpretations might be flawed.
Right. The source directly addresses alternative views. Let's start with the no-gap theory, the idea that the 70th week followed immediately after the 69th, ending sometime in the 30 CE. What are the main problems cited?
The source lists several fatal flaws. One is the 84-month mathematical impossibility. No gap requires 7 straight years, 84 months of tribulation. But all the specific biblical time references point to 42 months or 1,260 days.
Okay, the math doesn't line up with the details.
Second, the Acts historical contradiction. If the destruction happened by, say, 37 CE, how do you explain the book of Acts? It shows a thriving temple, sacrifices, Paul participating vows there in the late 50s CE. The source uses a restaurant analogy. It's like claiming a popular restaurant was completely demolished during its busiest week ever, while records show it was packed for years afterwards.
That's a helpful picture. What about Jesus' own words?
That's another key point, the Jesus promise violation. If the tribulation ran a full 84 months, how did Jesus shorten the days, as he promised in Matthew 24 and Mark 13? The source argues this makes Jesus' promise seem unfulfilled. It uses a contractor analogy, promising to shorten the bill but charging the full price.
And the timing of the abomination?
The abomination tyrant impossibility.
Okay.
No gap has the 70th week finished by 37 CE at the latest. But Jesus, speaking before that, points to the abomination of desolation, Matthew 24.15, as a sign that is still future for his disciples. That event, linked by this source to the Zealots, happened in 67 CE, 30 years after the no-gap theory says the week was fulfilled. It's like using the grocery store analogy, claiming the milk is completely sold out today, while pointing to the fully stocked shelf and saying it will actually be sold out next month. It doesn't track.
Okay. And there's an irony pointed out, too, the mirror moment.
Yes. The source finds it ironic that no-gap theories generally accept the roughly 37-year gap between Jesus' crucifixion, around 33 CE, and the actual destruction of Jerusalem, 70 CE. Yet, they rigidly forbid any gap between the 69th and 70th weeks. It poses the question directly to you. Why is a 40-year gap between Messiah's presentation and the start of judgment, the 70th week, considered unacceptable, but a 37-year gap between the crucifixion and the city's destruction, perfectly fine?
That's a fair challenge to the consistency. Okay, what about the other major view? The future gap theory. This is common in dispensationalism, placing the 70th week entirely in our future.
Right, and the source critiques this view too, outlining several fundamental failures. First, this generation problem. Jesus says in Matthew 24:34, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Future gap theories have to wrestle with that. Do they redefine generation unhistorically, suggest Jesus was mistaken, or claim all these things doesn't include the main events he just described, like the temple's destruction?
That's always been a tricky verse for future interpretations.
Then there's the arbitrary gap insertion. Where does the Bible explicitly authorize inserting a 2,000-plus year gap between the 69th and 70th weeks? The source argues there's no direct scriptural command for such a pause.
And the need for a future temple.
Exactly. The temple necessity impossibility. Future gap views require a rebuilt third temple in Jerusalem for sacrifices to be restarted and then stopped by an antichrist. But this source argues that contradicts New Testament theology, which teaches Christ's sacrifice ended the system, and the church, in a sense, replaced the temple's function.
What about the covenant mentioned in Daniel 9.27? Who makes it in a future scenario?
That's the covenant part in confusion. In a future 70th week, who's confirming this covenant? It can't be Jesus. His work is done. The source argues it can't be the Antichrist. He breaks covenant, doesn't confirm God's. And who would be a legitimate Jewish leader to make such a covenant representing Israel after the Old Covenant ended? It becomes problematic.
And one last critique mentioned.
What's called the contemporary Jewish-Christian contradiction. Often, Jewish Christian evangelists will use Daniel 9.26, the Messiah being cut off before the 70 CE temple destruction, as powerful proof that Jesus was the Messiah. Yet, the source notes, sometimes the same evangelists will then interpret Matthew 24, which describes the same temple destruction event, as referring to a future third temple and a future tribulation. The source basically says you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't use the 70 CE destruction to prove Jesus in Daniel 9, then postpone Matthew 24's description of that same destruction thousands of years into the future.
And the source actually quotes dispensationalist leaders to show this isn't a straw man argument.
Precisely. It quotes figures like Thomas Ice and John Walvoord to show they do explicitly hold these views: a future third temple, the long gap, a future 7-year tribulation. It uses their own words to highlight the positions this alternative framework is arguing against.
Okay, so having laid out this detailed historical framework and critiqued the alternatives, how does this all come together in a revolutionary conclusion for understanding the New Testament itself?
Well, fundamentally, the New Testament documents didn't just appear in a vacuum. They arose directly from this specific Second Commonwealth period. The apostolic mission, initially, was focused right there in the synagogues, proclaiming the Messianic age had arrived within that Jewish context. Paul's letters, mostly written between 50 and 65 CE, are dealing with real issues in churches navigating Jewish law, temple customs, Gentile inclusion. The idea of justification by faith takes on a powerful edge against the backdrop of a sacrificial system that, in this view, was understood to be in its final years.
And the dating of the New Testament books themselves becomes quite significant here.
Hugely significant. The source material argues quite forcefully that comprehensive evidence demonstrates that every New Testament book was completed before the temple's destruction in 70 CE. The main argument. The complete absence of any reference to this catastrophic event as a past occurrence within the New Testament writings. It's seen as deafening silence. If books were written after 70 CE, why wouldn't they mention the defining catastrophe that reshaped Judaism and validated Christian claims?
Are there specific markers used for this pre-70 dating?
Yes, it points to things like a recorded supernatural sign in the temple in May 62 CE and the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, around March-April 62 CE. The argument is that after these points, no New Testament book talks about temple services as if they are still currently happening in the present tense.
Yes, so the fall of Jerusalem and the temple's destruction really become the historical moment that solidified Christianity's identity as distinct from temple-centric Judaism.
Exactly. It provided powerful historical validation for the Christian claim that Jesus had fulfilled and effectively replaced the Old Covenant ceremonial aspects.
And this brings us back to the core discovery claimed by the source. The perfect theological architecture, revealed in the specific understanding of Daniel's 70th week. You mentioned 5 pillars.
Yes, 5 pillars that summarize this revolutionary understanding. First, mathematical precision. That exact timeline, 458 BCE to 26 CE, 483 years, the 40-year grace period, 26 to 66 CE, the first 42 months, 67 to 70 CE, the gap, and the final 42 months, 132, 135 CE.
Okay.
Precision.
Second, historical validation. The claim that Josephus's detailed accounts and archaeological findings confirm the specifics of the timeline and events, particularly the abomination and the tribulation.
History backs it up.
Third, biblical consistency. The argument that this framework honors all the biblical timing constraints, like the 42-month periods, fulfills Jesus' specific promises, like shortening the days, and maintains consistent prophetic patterns.
It fits the Bible's own rules.
Fourth, theological elegance. The beauty, if you will, of the structure grace preceding judgment, mercy limiting the suffering even within judgment, divine justice proving perfect and precise. A coherent theological picture. And the fifth.
Fifth, practical relevance. This wasn't just abstract prophecy for the first century, it was actionable intelligence. Knowing the signs, like the abomination, meant survival. For us today, it offers, proponents argue, enhanced understanding, apologetic power, and a clearer view of God's faithfulness.
So this is why the source calls it an interpretive revolution. It claims it changes things across the board.
That's the idea. For biblical interpretation, it elevates prophecy to divine history written in advance, arguing strongly for supernatural authorship. For eschatology, the study of end times, it's radical. The 70th week is done, fulfilled completely in the first and early second centuries. No need for future 7-year tribulations or rebuilt temples in that specific scenario.
Big implications there.
Huge. For apologetics, it offers what's presented as overwhelming, detailed evidence for the Bible's reliability. For church history, it positions Christianity as the authentic continuation and fulfillment of God's promises in the Old Covenant, not a replacement that nullified it.
And through all these details, the history, the prophecy, the interpretation, what picture of God's character emerges from this framework?
It highlights several facets. Divine mercy is seen in that 40-year grace period, the gap before judgment fell. Divine justice is evident in the precision and certainty with which judgment eventually arrived. Divine reliability shines through in the claim that every promise, every warning, every timeline was fulfilled exactly. And divine wisdom is showcased in the structure itself, grace offered before judgment, mercy actively limiting suffering by shortening the days.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, what does this all mean for you, the listener? This framework we've explored, it makes a bold claim. It resolves centuries of confusion around Daniel's 70th week. It argues forcefully that the week was about the prophesied end of the Old Covenant system centered on the temple. It claims this happened exactly as Daniel predicted, was documented in astonishing detail by the historian Josephus, and fits perfectly with that recurring biblical pattern of time, times, and half a time, the 42-month periods.
Yeah, the level of claimed precision is really staggering, and the theological implications are significant. Presents a paradigm shift, viewing the Second Jewish Commonwealth not as a failure, but as fulfilling its ultimate divine purpose. Its dramatic conclusion wasn't truly an ending, but the necessary beginning of a new age, the age where the God of Israel would, through the risen Messiah who came from that very Commonwealth, become known as the God of all nations.
So here's a final thought to consider. How might understanding these intricate historical connections, these detailed prophetic fulfillments as presented here, reshape your own understanding of God's timing, his purposes, and his faithfulness throughout history? It's definitely a framework that challenges conventional thinking and invites a much closer look at this pivotal era.